compounded that situation.
At an emergency meeting in Abuja to review developments, the ASUU leadership again announced the continuation of the strike. The statement that was released by the president of ASUU did say that there had been indeed no substantial progress made on the demands of ASUU. That is their own side of the story, Claire.
Well, this development, of course, has dashed to the hope of many students who are optimistic that the union might suspend the strike at this time in the interest, of course, not just of the students themselves, but also the nation at large.
So, what are the issues still at stake? And why is it that ASUU hasn't yielded, as it were, to calls by eminent Nigerians to return to the classrooms while negotiations continue? Now, is industrial action really in the interest of the educational development or other undisclosed interests? Why is it difficult for the union's leadership, some would ask, to shift grounds in their demands? These are some of the issues we intend to focus on as we discuss the indefinite extension of the current ASUU strike. As Claire indicated, this is now well past 6 months. Good morning, Nigeria is the program, and we thank you for tuning in. My name is Kingsley Osadolo.
And I'm Claire Adilabo Abdul-Razak. There's been going back and forth both on both sides. We don't even know what to believe at the moment. Federal government says they've met 80% of the demands. Also, it's saying on the other hand, government has shown no optimistic stance to their demands. Meanwhile, of course, some state universities are pulling out. Following what they say was the statement made by the ASUU president himself against the state universities.
That's right. The ASUU president was widely quoted as having said that state universities are irrelevant and that they are quacks. That's to use his words. And that, of course, has created quite some discomfort, if not displeasure, amongst state universities. Ekiti State has been one of the latest to pull out of the strike and continue with its academic activities. There are a number of issues still on the table that are unclear, even from the statement issued by ASUU at the end of its NEC meeting here at the University of Abuja. At the weekend, it was on Sunday, probably lasted up until Monday. The statement didn't quite disclose the details that remain unresolved, except to say that an agreement has not been reached. There are financial issues. Government on its own had previously said through the Minister of Labour that to implement some of the demands of ASUU would cost government 1.1 trillion naira. But ASUU says no. Yeah, ASUU says no, that's not correct. But ASUU doesn't tell us how much it would cost to implement that. ASUU also says that no progress had been made with respect to its demand for the utilization of UTAS and the abandonment of IPs for university lecturers. Now, the government itself, of course, had earlier indicated that there were issues identified by NITDA, that is the Technology Development Agency, that said there were issues with UTAS, and they needed to resolve all of that. Plus, if you know, the non-academic staff union have also brought their own salary wage, their own equivalent of UTAS. So how will all of this be resolved? And how long more can the students continue to stay at home?
Indeed, it's a conundrum. Yes, it was a shock to hear the indefinite extension. But that's why we're having this discussion today on Good Morning Nigeria. Once again, I am Claire Adilabo Abdul-Razak. It's always a pleasure to have you with us on the program. Hopefully today we will be able to have very constructive discussions and see if our guests can give us insight into what can be done or how a resolution can be brokered between the two parties involved. Good Morning Nigeria is live on the network service of the NTA, and in line with our tradition, we will bring you our complimentary segments. Coming up shortly will be highlights of the morning news. We'll also have our business segment much later, and much later we'll do a review of what the newspapers are saying. So for now, here is Frama Pai with the early morning news. Frama, it's good to see you.
Good to see you, Claire. Good morning, Kingsley. Good morning, Claire. Good morning, Nigerians. Here is the morning news. The expansion of security cooperation between Africa and Japan within the framework of the new approach for peace and stability is expected to benefit Nigeria and other African countries with technology towards eliminating insurgency. Speaking in Tunis at the Tokyo International Conference on African Development Summit, Nigeria's Minister of Foreign Affairs, Geoffrey Onyema, says various security mechanisms supported by the African unions, such as multinational joint task force, the G5 Sahel and the African Standby Force, need to be recalibrated to meet the current challenges against terrorism and banditry. Onyema believes that the TCAD partnership is another platform for engagement in addressing global problems in health, climate change and economy, and gives assurance of Nigeria's full support for the objectives of the summit and other multilateral forums. The need for proper coordination among security agencies, building public confidence in the armed forces of Nigeria, and national reorientation for national security, as well as understanding of deliberate government's effort at providing security, have been identified as key to strengthening local governance in the country. These are contained in the lectures at the National Institute of Policy and Strategic Studies, Executive Course 44.
Periodically, we've had to conduct workshops and seminars to make everyone within the security governance structure, for them to know what must be done, what they have done, what they need to escalate, what may not be too good, and which they need to work on.
When you are trying to mobilize the entire nation, to have a buy-in, to show concern and contribute their quotas in the efforts the country is making to deal with the security challenges we are facing, the local government level is very crucial.
United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres is asking for the end of testing of nuclear weapons, consigning them to history once and for all. This comes during the annual observance of the International Day Against Nuclear Tests, which also calls for global unity to end nuclear weapons, which should have no place in the world.
The significance of this day is to have a global voice calling on banning of nuclear tests in a way that the global community will have either total elimination or at least reduction in nuclear tests that give rise to nuclear weapons.
But the most important thing is that in the whole of African country, we came together as Africans to say that we want to have an Africa that is free of nuclear weapons. And therefore, we have the Plindaba Treaty, which Nigeria is a champion in ensuring that the Plindaba Treaty come into force.
Federal government is proposing a sum of 19.76 trillion naira expenditure for 2023. The Minister of Finance, Zainab Ahmed, made this known during an engagement with the House of Representatives Committee on Finance for an overview of the medium-term expenditure framework and fiscal strategy paper 2023 to 2025 submitted to the National Assembly for approval.
The average crude oil price, we all know, has been growing in the crude oil market. And this is supposed to have been an advantage to us, seeing as our budget was fixed at 73 and we have an average of 103. However, the higher oil price is offset by lower oil production output, which as at April stood at 1.32, and even up to July is still averaging the same. NNPC attributes this fall in production to the high incidence of crude oil theft and pipeline vandalization.
If we're able to get more revenue from the agencies, the deficit will reduce. The security of our oil equipment, nature of the terrain where our oil pipelines are, there is the need for them to deploy incentive mechanism. Most countries, they are looking for ways to stimulate their economy. What do we have in place for ordinary Nigerian?
And key players in the judicial sector across the country are in Abuja, brainstorming on ways of sustaining financial integrity in the sector. The National Workshop on Management of Judicial Financial Resources is at the instance of the National Judicial Institute and is aimed at making the judiciary more efficient in the performance of duties.
As resource managers in the judiciary, you must keep abreast of current trends in financial sector in an effort to curb corruption and waste. And in so doing, enhance transparency in your day-to-day activities in the judiciary. Consequently, you should avoid all appearances of mispriority and live above board, doing otherwise will negatively affect the integrity of the judiciary.
United Nations independent expert on the enjoyment of all human rights by older persons, Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights in Geneva, Dr. Claudia Mala, is in Nigeria to assess the implementation of national, regional, and international standards relevant to the rights of older persons. A few months after defecting from the All Progressive Congress to the new Nigeria People's Party, the senator representing Kano Central District at the National Assembly, Malam Ibrahim Shekaro, has rejoined the People's Democratic Party. Until his defection, Senator Shekaro was the senatorial candidate of the NNPP in his constituency. And that's the news for now. Good Morning Nigeria continues with Claire and Kingsley after this break.
All right, welcome back. If you've just tuned in, you're watching Good Morning Nigeria, and it's happening live on the network service of the NTA. So let's give you some business tips now. And we hear that the growth recorded across the various e-payment platforms have remained strong in the past 7 months of 2022. And that data is coming from the Nigeria Interbank Settlement System. This is part of our business package as put together by correspondent Alika Okpanachi Arwa.
Some of the expected benefits arising from the adoption of the e-Naira include deepening financial inclusion, improving the efficiency of payments, enhancing cross-border payments and remittances, improving trade integration, a viable option for the distribution of stimulus and government interventions, and improved transmission of monetary policy.
Let's take a look at Monday tradings on the floor of the exchange. With business news, Alika Okpanachi Arwa.
All right, that was business news as put together by Alika Okpanachi Arwa. So let's move on to newspaper review, and that's up next.
All right. Thank you, Claire. Well, of course, we're having the it's caught in the act, as the saying goes. We have at least 3 newspapers this morning, and Leadership, The Sun, and one other. Let's begin by taking a look at the window page of the Leadership newspaper. Above the nameplate, groom, 6 guests die, bride, and 8 others hospitalized. Groom, 6 wedding guests die, bride, and 8 others hospitalized in Enugu. That's a sad one there. Details on page 16. Court rejects federal government's request to extradite Kyari to the U.S. And below the nameplate, federal government piles more debts on next president with 11 trillion naira borrowing for 2023. And Chakarao hobnobs with APC, NNPP, PDP in 3 months. Chakarao, that's in Kano, hobnobs with APC, NNPP, PDP in 3 months. Details of that you find on page 7. Now the lead story comes with a kicker after 199 days of industrial action. ASUU loses ground as more state varsities pull out of strike. You have the details on page 4, but the riders to that headline are as follows. Pro-chancellors want union democratized as lecturers extend strike indefinitely. Say unions' quest for funding varsities outdated. Slam Oshodeke for calling state varsities quacks. We have met over 80% of lecturers' demands. That's the federal government. They have lost Nigerians' sympathy. That's the last rider to that. And then on the first column, the left-hand side of the paper, court restrains President Muhammadu Buhari and NBC, that's the Broadcasting Commission, from shutting down 53 broadcast stations. Ohaneze to pick consensus presidential candidate from Southeast. Claire.
Kingsley, there are quite a lot of political news on the front pages, and I'm wondering, how do we draw the line between these stories and campaign news? Because, I mean, almost all the papers are carrying stories about
campaigns.
Well,
Well, I think that it's something that has to be examined going forward. The former flag of campaigns so sometime next month for the general elections beginning in February next year. But obviously some of the activities that we have seen would amount to invariably campaigns. But so you can also not stop the kind of activities that we are seeing at the moment. The fact that candidates have emerged from the primaries of the political parties doesn't mean that the candidates will be quiet before the former flag off. Perhaps they should then bring forward the flag off of campaigns that as soon as the primaries are over, then they might as well begin their campaigns.
Honestly, because
campaigns can't be too early.
I'm wondering how the regulating authorities can, control what is happening now. Anyhow, we have Daily Sun reporting on some of the political activities. I won't go into that, but let me take one of the stories trending on the front page. Court bars Buhari NBC from shutting down 53 broadcast stations. That story is on page 28. And Kingsley, I thought that NBC had a meeting with Bonn, and I think there was an agreement to suspend the shutting down of those stations, pending some form of resolution.
Well, that's true. And NBC, of course, has then proceeded with suspending the enforcement of its earlier directive to shut down those stations. That was on the basis of that. Yes. But this one is arising from an action in court by Serap and the Guild of Editors. And it's a much deeper thing in the sense that the action is even querying the basis of the renewal of license fees and why that should be so. But this is an interim order, so the matter is still sub judice, and then we'll see how it pans out.
Oh, yes. Okay, thank you for that explanation. So, still with the Daily Sun, federal government unsure of capital projects vote in 2023, proposes 19.76 trillion naira budget. That's interesting. Other stories trending, if we just tilt down, heavy cash movements threatening Nigeria, EFCC. It's on page 27. Again, ASUU extends strike as Copson says state varsities can't be coerced to implementing agreement. Buhari seeks rejig of AU's security mechanisms to end terrorism and banditry. It's on page 28. Again, court rejects FJ's request to extradite Abba Kyari to US. And IGP condemns attacks on policemen, orders prosecution of offenders. Okay. That's the front page of the Daily Sun. So let me move on to the National Star. Again, it's all on political story, and I will have to skip it. But the there is a story there. Hush Puppy court rejects FG's request for Abba Kyari's extradition to US. It's a story that is trending. Just a little below the nameplate, ASUU again extends strike, and mummified corpses. Edo police gives details of investigation. Now, court stops Buhari again. We read out that story earlier on. I think these are all that I have, Kingsley, for now.
Well, yeah, interesting stories there. In the case of the federal government's request to extradite Abba Kyari, that's the suspended Deputy Commissioner of Police to the U.S., in the matter involving the Nigerian known otherwise as Hush Puppy, who is in the U.S. The court ruled and said that the request was incompetent in the sense that Abba Kyari, according to the depositions in court, Abba Kyari had the confidence of his bosses while undertaking the activities he was alleged to have undertaken with Hush Puppy, and that they were all intended to entrap Hush Puppy, bring him to Nigeria, and then, of course, pick him up with the intelligence response team of the Inspector General of Police. That's one leg of the story. Second leg is that the rules governing extradition are pretty clear. Abba Kyari, it's also undergoing trial for another matter, and the person who's already undergoing trial cannot simultaneously be extradited to another jurisdiction for trial. So that's the ground. We'll see. Perhaps this probably is not the end of the story. It depends on how the trial pans out otherwise, or whether, for instance, the Attorney General of the Federation seek to go on appeal, because this is a decision by the court of first instance. That's one.
Story.
Yeah.
Okay, this is the story on the front page on the issue of capital projects. The Daily Sun says that FG unsure of capital projects votes in 2023. Apparently, this is a story that is emanating from the Minister of Finance's appearances, yesterday to the National Assembly, where she has been reported to have said that there will be no treasury-funded capital projects for the MDAs. Now, I'm wondering what implication this will have, because it will mean some of the capital projects that are meant to drive attainment of the Sustainable Development Goals will not be pursued.
That's a very important observation that you have made. But I thought that again, depending on the approach of the editors and what stories they consider significant, I thought that the finance minister's warning yesterday, or statement, if you may, was one that ordinarily should trigger some concern, and then ways, of course, getting around it. Because the fundamental basis of what you said was that the country continues to experience revenue shortages. But in the meantime, the country also has to service its debts, local and foreign. You cannot therefore begin to get into more debt when you know you have a revenue challenge, even though the numbers in terms of the relativity of your debt as a ratio to your GDP would appear to be suitable or comfortable in the meantime. So there is a revenue challenge. And why is there a persisting revenue challenge? Because we've had that over the years. And we have also seen what the revenue authorities, more particularly FRS, has tried to do in casting the net much wider and bringing in more persons into the net. In other words, greater efficiency in tax administration. But the revenue shortfalls continue. Again, some persons would argue that you're not having a boom in the economy. So if you were having a boom, the latest reports say that we have had a growth of around 3.something%, but you're not having a boom in the economy. If you're having a boom, then more taxes will accrue. But the issue of then saying that, look, there will be no treasury-funded capital projects means that
There's so many implications.
many implications.
But Kingsley,
yes,
some of these ministries are not revenue generating. We could say, okay, those agencies that are revenue generating, can do well to, look for other areas of, creating income. But what about the ministries that are not revenue generating, that depend on, allocations from the treasury? to fund projects. And there are quite a number of government projects and programs that are multi-sectorally implemented. There are so many SDG goals, and in particular because most of the our priority areas deal with, human health. It deals with education of children, it deals with women, it deals with the vulnerable groups and issues of poverty. You need a lot of, you need money to drive, projects.
Those projects, no question about that, but I want to also assume that if the numbers begin to look up, there can always be a realignment in terms of, for instance, a supplementary budget going forward once the economy gets into 2023. So if there are revenue shortfalls that did not enable the federal government to have treasury-funded capital projects, then, of course, you can always, as I said, have a supplementary allocation going forward. But which is not to say that all MDAs will have virtually nothing to do. Yes, I believe so. But these are issues that I think that treasury experts and other economic analysts will focus on. I want to raise two the issues. They are not on the front pages of the papers that we read this morning. I read one of the stories online, and I've not read a rebuttal of the story, and it is coming from Ondo State. The governor of Ondo State, Akeredolu, learned senior advocate of Nigeria, is said to have issued a directive that all school teachers in Ondo State should have their children enrolled in public schools.
Yes.
And
yes, I read it as well.
Oh, fantastic.
Yes,
so that all school teachers in Ondo State should have their children enrolled in public schools. In other words, you cannot have your children in private schools while you are a teacher with the state. And part of the reason, as was reported, is that school enrollment had dropped because teachers were not having their own children get onto the public school system. It's a good idea on the face of it, but it is not comprehensive enough. Why single out school teachers in Ondo State? School teachers in Ondo State are not responsible for budgeting, neither are they responsible for the implementation of budget allocations. So we're just discussing federal government allocations now. So if there isn't sufficient funding for public schools to bring them to the standard of private schools, why now do you want the school teachers alone to bear the burden? If you had said all government employees in Ondo State have your children enrolled in public schools, then that would be ideal. But in the meantime, I think it is discriminatory, and the governor, meaning well, may have to review this altogether.
And I think
withdraw it.
What can be done, again, Kingsley, just before we round off this segment, is, and I want to recall, in River State, I think it was during the tenure of the former Minister of Transportation, Rotimi Chibuike, the schools, the model schools he built,
yes,
public schools, you find that the parents were withdrawing their, students from private schools.
That's right.
From private schools, it got to a stage where even the schools where I had my children, parents were withdrawing their, people's
sending them to the
public model schools.
Yes.
So all we need to do, we don't have to make laws. We need to, upgrade our infrastructure.
But that's not the business of the school teachers to
exactly.
do. Yes, it's the business of the government. In this case, it will be through SUBEB. That is the State Universal Basic Education Board.
That's why they got funds.
Absolutely.
And most states have not been accessing their own.
Well, you bet.
Yes.
One other last story. Very quickly, I know that we're out of time, Claire. One other last story. 2 airline pilots who fly Air France have been suspended for fighting in the cockpit.
Is that true? Is that true story?
Absolutely true. The first time I saw the headline and I read the story, I said to myself, could it be another boo-boo? But on various platforms, reputable international media outlets, the story has been confirmed that 2 airline pilots of Air France have been suspended for fighting in the cockpit. The incident happened mid-air. This was in June this year, and the flight was from Geneva to Paris. My question is, why did it take at least 2 months for the 2 pilots to be suspended.
That was
It was scary. Absolutely scary. And yeah, absolutely scary. So they've been suspended, and we do hope that they learn their lessons. They fought in the cockpit. One of them then left because the other cabin crew intervened, and one of the pilots then took the aircraft to safe landing. The flight from Geneva to Paris ran about 45 minutes. I believe I'm not quite sure what about 45 minutes. Yeah, Geneva. I used to take that. I used to enjoy that flight on Swiss Air when Swiss Air was in operation. So, Claire, in the absence of anything else, we call it time on our newspaper review segment. It's Good Morning Nigeria live on NTA's network service. We'll take a short break now. When we return, we'll be dealing with what ASUU has now described as comprehensive, total, and indefinite extension of the ongoing strike.
That is it. Yeah.
All right. Of course, the studio is live, and our guests are just making, of course, themselves comfortable. But just before we bring them into our conversation, to remind you again that Nigerian students in public universities have been at home for the past 6 months. Of course, following the strike called by the Academic Staff Union of Universities, ASUU. But just yesterday, the strike took a new dimension as ASUU says it has, I want to use the adjectives Kingsley used earlier on, extended a comprehensive, or it has embarked on a comprehensive, total and indefinite strike this time around. And that declaration was against the expectations of many Nigerians, including students, parents, and every concerned citizen. So our background report is compiled by Joseph Oten. Let's listen to him, and it will chronicle some of the issues and efforts made to end the strike.
The lecturers have refused to bow down and persisted with the strike. While government says it has implemented much of the demands of ASUU, the union insists it needs more to reposition the nation's highest academic institutions for development of the nation's education sector. Not long ago, ASUU rejected the recommended Consolidated University Academic Salary Structure prepared by the National Salaries, Incomes and Wages Commission. In early August, ASUU went on to roll over the strike for another 4 weeks, claiming it's giving government additional time to implement the pending demands. And just yesterday at a meeting in Abuja, the union overwhelmingly voted against resumption, venting his anger on a national television as to why some state universities have refused to toe the path of ASUU. The president of the union, Emmanuel Osudike, described them as irrelevant and quacks. The statement has evoked criticism from the public and the academia, with a committee of pro-chancellors of state-owned universities saying ASUU's approach to the issue of funding of tertiary education in a modern global world is archaic and impracticable anywhere in the world. Adding membership of ASUU is voluntary, therefore state universities cannot be forced or coerced to implement agreements. The questions on the lips of many include: how beneficial is the prolonged ASUU industrial action to the development of the Nigerian university and their students? How realistic are ASUU requests? And is there a way out that will interest both parties? And what is the fate of the affected students? Guests on Good Morning Nigeria will try to provide some insights.
All right, thank you very much for that background report. We have guests with us here in the studios as well as guests joining us via Zoom. Here, let's welcome Comrade Issa Aremu. Comrade Issa Aremu, a regular guest on Good Morning Nigeria, and Director General and CEO, Michael Imodu National Institute for Labor Studies. That's at Ilorin in Kwara State. Comrade Issa Aremu, glad to have you this morning.
Good morning, Nigerians. True Sajalo and
all right.
Yeah,
and also here with us in the studios, it's Professor Abdullahi Sule Kano. He's a former president of ASUU. Professor Sule Kano, we're glad to have you.
Good morning, everybody.
Glad?
Okay, you have one more guest to introduce.
That's. I wanted to ask you to introduce so that you'll be two apiece. You know, you always like gender balance in this thing, so it will be two apiece. But let's also, at this time, welcome regular guests on Good Morning Nigeria. Very passionate about issues surrounding education. Chief Sylvester Onoja, former Commissioner for Education in Kogi State, and also where he was former chairman of the Teaching Service Commission in that state. But people know him very well, his pupils, whenever they see him, and his students, former principal of King's College in Lagos. Chief Sylvester Onoja, considering the circumstances under which you had to make it to the studios this morning, we really appreciate your presence today.
Thank you very much. Good morning, Nigeria.
All right, Kingsley, talking about gender, yes, indeed. That's we're all pursuing an inclusive, system. So any program you don't have gender balance, that calls for concern. Even in the makeup of our guests here, there's no balance.
Well, you're here.
Well, no, I'm the presenter. I'm
Yeah, but the segment, clear. I mean, but our viewers do know that this segment permits the injection of presenter opinion, even as leading questions.
Well, let me just, Alita continue. So let me also introduce our guest who's joining us via Zoom from Ile-Ife. And if we can have him, Dr. Niyi Simono is the National Coordinator, Congress of University Academics. That's him. Thank you very much for joining us, Doctor.
Yeah, good morning. Thank you very much for having me this morning.
Okay, Kingsley.
All right, gentlemen, once again, we're glad to have you. Dr. Simono, we hope that your Zoom connection will be stable and sharp throughout this conversation. But let's begin with the former president of ASUU, Professor Abdullahi Sulekano. We've had you on Good Morning Nigeria in the past discussing the same issues. It's 6 months and 2 weeks into the latest industrial action by ASUU, and the issues surrounding the extension, which ASUU has now described as comprehensive, total, and indefinite. Those issues are probably fairly well known. But perhaps one should ask a bit provocatively, as some persons have suggested in some quarters, is there some competition amongst the various leadership of ASUU on different occasions to see who organizes the longest strike action in the history of ASUU?
Nothing like that, actually. It's the history and the dynamics in the way the university in Nigeria has been handled that generates all these things that you are seeing. And that historical facts, which you can scientifically analyze, takes almost every leader in the academic cycle who takes that position, that he has to act that way. So it's not about competition at all. If there is anybody who thinks about that, it's a myth. The reality is that every ASUU president had to be confronted with the very challenging conditions in which his wish and aspiration that makes him think that Nigerian university should be like any other university in the world in the context of standard and operations and traditions of scholarship. And even if you can't get the international standard, at least have the first generation standard, for those who are in the universities up to late 70s, even early 80s, they know that there is a fundamental difference between what they were at that time and today. And that's the concern. And when the leadership of the union raises that concern, it's hardly been appreciated by government. And in fact, this is what led to the setting up of a team, by government that subsequently we call the program as need assessment. After the 2009 agreement, the union made an estimate of what it think will, salvage the university from the terrible condition that they are in. And in that assessment, it was a scientific study. And we estimated at least about almost 4 trillion can put Nigerian universities at par with any international university in the world. But at a point in time, that figure would seem to have been exaggerated. Studies reviewed and reviewed, then we established that at least what we need, the minimum we need, is just about 1.4 trillion to put them at least to the minimum conditions that we can attract scholars from other parts of the world, and we can attract students, and we can make them also play a relevant role in the economy of the country, which we know we can within a short time. But unfortunately, the government did not agree with us, but we were able to convince them, okay, send an independent committee to go and do that. They set up the Need Assessment Committee. Professor Mahmoud, the now INEC chairman, chaired that committee. They went around the universities and assessed the actual conditions of the decay. And they came out with virtually the same estimate that we did, 1.3 trillion. We're scholars, we cannot be that stupid and unreasonable, We didn't say that the government should cough out 1.3 billion in one fell swoop. Trillion, in one fell swoop. It was planned that this can be handled in 6 years. 6 years. From 2013, Okay, this when the first tranche was released, no tranche was ever released again. That's the cause of the crisis.
We've been reading all the back and forth stories. It's out there in the domain. But I'd like to start my question, Kingsley permits me. From the immediate, and we know that since the strike started on the 14th of February,
yes,
the battleground has not remained the same. It's been shifted. We're told that, on the part of the federal government, some overtures have been made, some concessions have been made, some actions have been taken. Of course, ASUU leadership, has come to say, that had not happened. We don't know what the true picture is as we speak. But against this background, that discussions have been going on, what do you think of this comprehensive, indefinite, and total extension of the strike?
You see, the fundamental basis of that is that all that we went through for almost 5 years now, the process of negotiation, which violates the international labor law, both our domestic labor law and international labor convention, you negotiate with labor within a short time. That negotiation is supposed to take only 6 weeks. It lasted over 3 years. And yet, even at a point at which it was clear to almost every Nigerian that we are reaching to a point of, resolving the matter, then it was cancelled. The principle of collective bargaining was virtually being, in a way, being cancelled or abolished, I would say, by government. They push aside what was negotiated on the table and now hand over, an award, take it or leave it. That's the language. Take it or leave it. That's the crux of the matter. And if you do that to any category of worker, who is not a slave, he has a right, he's a citizen. He will protest. That's what actually caused the complications.
Okay, well, Professor Sule Kano, thank you very much. We'll have the benefit of your participation in this conversation throughout. We hope we'll be able to drill into the specifics of the demands of ASUU, because most of what is reported now is, he said, He added, he didn't say, the other one said, government said this, no, ASUU said this. So we need some clarification. We know that you don't belong to the current executive committee or council of ASUU, but of course you are an insider and while you remain an academic. So thank you very much, Professor Sule Kano. We will, as I said, return to you in the course of the conversation. Very quickly, I want to bring in Comrade Issa Aremu. Comrade Issa Aremu, some weeks ago, we had a conversation on this same subject matter. And I recalled part of what you were saying with respect to the tactics, if you may, of labor agitation, labor demand, and basically to reduce it to a layman's language is that, look, pick your fights, win some, lose some, move on, and return when the atmosphere or the climate is favorable. But here we are, since our last conversation on the ASUU strike, now it looks like it's bleak. What are your thoughts?
Well, thank you, Otadela. Once again, let me say good morning to everybody, and in particular my co-discussant. Well, I think Professor Sule Kano, my very good friend, comrade too, I think he has tried to put the issues from ASUU point of view in perspective. And I don't think there's nobody who's eminently qualified to say so, because he was the former president of ASUU. I don't know whether I get it right, between 2004 and 2008. And also currently is part of the negotiating team with the government. My takeaway from his submission is that it is clear that we have a legacy problem in our hand, because he went on historic excursions, or I will have come a long way. So I think we should get it clear that there's a legacy crisis here. So it's not just starting now. It's been on almost from 1981, when we had the decline in the funding for public universities, you know. And personally, some of us also went to these universities, including my dear comrade. Things were far from being perfect when we were in the universities. I know very well. I mean, I've been to ABU back now, and I know we have more modern structures that we used to have them when I was there, and I know the conditions of our lecturers that time. Some were riding bicycles, but they were really committed to the academic scholarship, start of the challenges. But I know from 80s, we had decline in the funding of public education, which has now made the Association of Academic Staff to, you know, engage in struggles for improvement in reviving the public university. And that's why it's done very well in terms of advocacy to raise the issues about the plight of the universities. So, quick takeaway there is that it's been on, so it's not just now. And I think all of us, all the parties involved in this crisis, must recognize that improvement in any sector is a work in progress. You know, it cannot be once and for all. But my quick submission here, which I want to make, don't forget, once a comrade, always a comrade. But for now, I'm also the Director General of Michael Imodu Labour Institute in Ilorin. Our job is to promote knowledge, education about labor market issues. You know, one quick thing I would like to raise is that what we have is also crisis of collective bargaining. You know, and in the world of work, Nigeria has very robust labor laws. We are a member of ILO, we have labor laws, which all these laws emphasize that there will always be conflict in the world of work. They are inevitable, you know, including the one we're having in the education sector. But the way to resolve this crisis is through dialogue, collective bargaining. And the process of collective bargaining means be serious. The parties have to be serious, but don't be too serious so that you can be serious again. Now, what does that one mean? Is that we must have sense of compromises. You know, you make your demand, which is known as proposals. and of course there will be discussions. You work out an agreement, the other parties will do counter proposals, then you negotiate, you find a way to have a compromise. That's the way it should be. I mean, she's also affiliate member of Nigerian Labour Congress, and don't forget, now we have signed 5 national agreement dealing with minimum wage, new minimum wages. The latest one is the current one of 30,000. Now, if you check right from the beginning, including the first one, in fact, that was the first one, 1981, led by Alhaji Hassan Sumanu, a pioneer president of NSC, who's also trustee of ASUU. The strike lasted just for 2 days. Once they called for discussion, we went for negotiation. The last demand for new minimum wage, we actually demanded for 96,000. Don't forget that time per month. But what we could get at the end of the day was 30,000 after you do all the tradings and co. So what I'm saying is that negotiation is about compromises, and I think the principle should apply to the education sector. We should find a way. Then, of course, in this process there could be breakdown. There will be breakdown. Strike, and I know I listened to Professor Sule very well. In fact, they had to threaten strike before they resumed negotiation last time, for 2 weeks, and they came back. Now, but the question I want to raise is that, and I listened to Sule very well, because he said, according to the principles of negotiation, of discussion worldwide, is that negotiation shouldn't last more than certain minimum. It shouldn't be too long, and I agree with you. 6 weeks. 6 weeks, fine. We can debate that, but I take his point that because it's meant to resolve problem, because the word of work is word of productivity. So quickly you discuss, you return back. But so also our reaction should be time bound. So if for whatever reason there's a breakdown, you go on strike 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, now 200 days. What will be the limit to it? And that's my own worry. When I listened to the last communicator of ASUU, comprehensive, total, indefinite. I was saying, are we having a warfare or an industrial conflict? Okay, I'm just posting this. Not that I have an answer. Yes, but the last quick point I want to raise on this, let me give you a practical example. Recently, the National Union of Electricity Workers had cause to go on strike. I don't know, maybe you have generator in your house, but even with the comrades,
I better pass my load.
But even with the comrades, we also that from national grid. But one thing you must grant Adero and his team is that NUC quickly they call up the strike. It wasn't prolonged. Now they are back to negotiation. And they are almost commit to. They also gave notice to say no more than 2 weeks. And my finding shows that they're almost concluding their negotiation, because they also knew that we can strike, but make it brief, because the whole strike is to make the other parties to return to the table for discussions, so that we have an eye on the ball. And in the case of education sector, my concern is the plight of those poor students. Okay, how long can the strike last? Well, we have total indefinite strike. I would say total non-teaching. We are not going to graduate straight in this school. I think those are the issues. Okay. I thought we should open the talk for discussion.
Okay, let me put you a little bit on the spot.
Okay.
Now you are the Director General of the National Institute for Labour Studies. So you have a better insight of the workings and thinkings and of government. I'm sure that if you were on the other side now, you will also be amplifying the stance of comprehensive, total and indefinite strike. If you were if you were still on the other side. But can you, from your experience on both sides, what can you tell us about government's posture towards ASUU demands? Because we've heard several times ASUU says government is deceitful, government is not is not straightforward with them, government does not want to parley. What do you think is government? How can you describe government's posture towards these whole demands?
Yeah, I think it's the same thing I've said. But by the way, don't forget, I've seen it on all sides. Don't forget, when I was in labor, I mean, I've led a union from a very turbulent sector, textile and garment workers. We've signed, as I returned and left, and I'm very sure my successors continue the struggle. We've signed close to 45 national agreements. When textile was textile, and none we did by shutting down the industry. None. Through process of collective bargaining, compromises. We also put a framework in which we negotiate almost every 2 years. And all the parties obey they abide by the collective agreement. So what I'm saying is that even when I was the other side, as you put it, although I'm on all the side, as you put it that, I want to put it that way. I think the principle remains the same, that government or any party should learn to respect collective agreement as enter into. Now, if for whatever reason the agreement is no more sustainable, you must reopen the need for discussions. With the current struggle going on, I don't know, unfortunately government officials are not here. When I mean government officials, it would be nice to have the sector ministers, because Ministry of Education, because Ministry of Labor only arbitrates when they couldn't reach an agreement, but it would have been nice to listen to. But what I've also have gathered is that there have been series of discussions going on, and of course you've seen them. We've seen it also on TV and the rest of them. Now, the bottom line is, what will be the level of compromise that should be reached? And ASUU talk of 1.2 trillion. If you ask me, the way to revive public education, you even need more than that. No. So I'm for it. I know President Buhari, when he came to office, tried to raise the budget allocation, to education up to about 8%. At a point about 3-4 years ago, although it has come down now, given the collapse of semi-collapse of the oil revenue and co. So everybody's committed to more funding, as the case may be. But whether you need 1 trillion, 2 trillion, it comes from the same national revenue. How do you get it done? Again, this way, government also make its own case to say, wait, this is what we have on offer. And if you cannot give, because I know this 1 trillion, even during Jonathan, I think it was agreed upon, but unfortunately he couldn't fund it either. So you now agree to pay in tranches. Maybe that's what I'm looking for. But you need to educate us further on that. But I also know that this government have put some fund, they put something on offer, but it's not enough. Whatever it is, what I'm saying is that we must negotiate in an atmosphere in which all the parties are free to do so. You don't negotiate under pressure. Government has no right to lock out academic staff. Am I communicating very well? I mean, because they lock them out, So also, once negotiation begins, ASUU must learn to bend down, suspend, to allow for negotiation in a good atmosphere. Because let me round up on this note. The beauty of collective bargaining is that no power, no partner or no stakeholder should be too strong, because absolute power corrupts absolutely. Whether it is government that is too absolute, it leads to distortion. Whether it is union that has declared union power that is so absolute, it leads to distortion. You can get some result, sweetheart agreement under pressure. They will say inside, but it's not sustainable. That's the point I'm raising. But if you do something freely, in which everybody says this is what we have, you have a template to drive it there, because of 2009. We are still pursuing the same spirit of that agreement, because you could get it through pressure. Whatever it is, but whatever the situation, the point I want to raise here is that everybody is committed to reviving the education sector. ASUU has raised the next level of the need for more funding. We've come a long way. I think it's important to now reach a compromise. And you can't do so, it has to be done through bargaining. And we can't do so if you do total, indefinite.
And comprehensive.
Oh, well, you know better than me. It sounds like a warfare. And I think government should now have a way to look at, the way to address some of those concerns. Because I also know they talk of, up to now, they've not been paid for 6-7 months. That's also a legitimate claim.
Yeah.
you can't do so outside. It has to be on the negotiating table.
We are going to pause you. I know that.
Yes,
I know you can continue for the next hour. So you've raised a number of very important issues, as just the same way as Professor Sulekano raised very important issues. I want to crave the indulgence of Chief Sylvester Onoja. This is not to say, again, I know that one issue that you always canvass relates to the priority not given to secondary education. But we have a Zoom connection to Dr. Niyi Sumono. We earlier introduced him, and I hope the Zoom is still, all right, so the Zoom is still there, so we're going to take advantage of it and then get him to weigh in on this issue. He's the National Coordinator of Congress of University Academics. The Congress of University Academics came up a couple of years ago, but what is the perspective on this whole issue on the extension of the strike, indefinite, total, and comprehensive? Well, are you on the same page with ASUU?
Is he on strike?
Thank you very much. Good morning, Nigerians, and thank you for having me this morning. I greet the guests in the house, whom I have profound respect for. From our perspective, or for our perspective, we think strongly and we believe strongly that this current impasse needs to be nipped in the bud, needs to be brought to a close in the shortest possible time. And that cannot be achieved with indefinite, with comprehensive, with total industry action. And we have the strong opinion that discussion, negotiation, engagement must continue. And as rightly opined by Senior Comrade Isarem, that kind of engagement, that kind of discussion should be done with an open mind. Should be done with intention. If you are going to that kind of engagement, that I'm not going to meet my adversary in that kind of engagement. Should be done in such a way that we have a mind that we can, a mind of give and take, concessions. And that has to continue, even in situations of war. Discussions, wars can be resolved eventually by discussions. And history has told us that. That's the immediate minimum that we request for to end this impasse immediately. Again, we have the opinion strongly also that that kind of discussion should be expanded to include more stakeholders. We have eminent Nigerians like those in that studio, like those people that have unblemished record in their track record in the service of this country. The alumni of different universities, of different institutions, who have done well, who are still doing well in different walks of life. Because why we're advocating for that is simply because if you follow the trend, there's a breakdown of trust on the two parties involved. They are negotiating. We also advocate the expansion to include the parents and the students on the side of funding of university, because that thing, the issues can be broadly broken down into two. Funding of university under which you can get autonomy, under which you can get improvement in the structures, in the teaching materials, and in the research facilities, and so on and so forth. On the other side is the issue of remunerations, which is, I must say, is very poor. When it comes to that, with respect to negotiation, all of that stakeholders need to actually excuse. It has to do with the employee and the government to negotiate that. But issues that have to do with improvement of the standard of the universities, all these other stakeholders, we need to be brought in to expand the discussion. And before I stop here with this intervention, I need to also say that the feedback mechanism of the government needs to be improved upon strongly. In a situation where you reach out to the government, it takes about 1 month, 2 months before you get feedback. It's not encouraging at all. This is our common patrimony, education, and no nation can develop beyond the level of its education. So we want an immediate solution to to this. And that immediate solution is with regards to continuous engagement with an open mind that has to be done and done as good as now. Lastly, I want to say that going forward, we don't have to be reactionary in our situation, in our response to education, university education in this particular case. The media needs to also play its role of digging deep into who needs to do what needs to be done rather first, and who needs to do what. Timeline set, and Nigerians need to be brought into constant update of information on who is failing in his or her duties to do what and when they need to do those things. So we don't have to wait until industry actions are called before we all become interested in what is going on in our universities. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Simone, for your perspective. Let's bring in Chimsebes Onoja, who is a former Commissioner for Education and former Chairman, Teaching Service Commission. In all of this drama going on, students are bearing the brunt. ASUU is saying government is insensitive and indifferent to the plight of children, students and their parents. And government is saying vice versa. Who exactly is hurting Nigerian students?
Thank you very much. I decided to stay for this discussion because I am passionate about the younger ones and those coming. The real enemies of the Nigerian student, ASUU, and the federal government. You see, I have always said, and I have said here several, that there is no legitimacy in education in Nigeria. In politics, legitimacy means that the right people are ruling, and they are ruling rightly. In education, legitimacy means that the right people are administering education, the right people are teaching, and the right people are learning. In this circumstance, the right people are not administering education, the right people are not teaching, and the right people are not learning. If the right people are administering education, this problem probably would have been resolved from the beginning. And if the right people are teaching, I started teaching in the university. Then I taught in the primary school, taught in the secondary school, in the university, then secondary school. There is this saying in this country that the teacher's reward is in heaven. And all I have agitated for is that at least government should pay teachers the traveling allowances to go to heaven. Even that allowance is not being paid. It's unfortunate. There's the decay in education. It has always been there from primary school. Previous governments tried to raise standards of primary education. The UBEC is there, and we are familiar with that story. We always have free education in this country at the basic education level. But the only thing we have in this country going for us is that our schools are free of education. That is the only aspect of free education that we have. Those students are caught in the middle now, those who have left secondary school and all that, and the universities. Yes, the university teachers want a perfect environment and all that learning and teaching can take place. It's unfortunate. It's also not taking place in the primary school and secondary school. I think that they are right, no doubt about it. I support them. But the other side, you can't clap with one hand. The government is not responsive. Because in Nigeria, education has been heavily politicized. Politics has taken over everything. I'll give you an example. In the Ministry of Health, you have a minister who must be a medical doctor. The Minister of State must be a medical doctor. You have the Ministry of Justice. You have to become Minister of Justice, you must be a lawyer. And to be a permanent secretary, the Solicitor General must also be a lawyer. But what has happened to education? And it's not now. In 1958, we had the first Minister of Education, Ajan Wajuku. He wasn't a teacher. He was succeeded by Weneke Briggs, who himself was not a teacher. Then came A.Y. Eke. And all that line. Since Nigerian independence in 1960, only 4 teachers have become ministers of education. I'm not talking about ministers of state. So there is no communication. There's need to have people who know on the other side talking to people who know on this other side. They're not serious. But you see, we must be compassionate. It is not about the politicians who are here today or the teachers who are here today. It's about tomorrow. I want ASUU to think about tomorrow. The people we are damaging today are the future, are the leaders. If they become idiots, and one dangerous thing about idiots is that their numbers multiply. They multiply so fast that one day they will elect one of them to be the president of this country, where all the ASUU with professors and all that will be there. You think you're an abandon, who said, where ignorance is bliss, it is folly to be wise. We should not increase the number of ignorant people in this country. That's why we are where we are. All the problems we have. But those who have no education, those who have been neglected, you didn't send to school. So I am here, I have waited because the circumstances I came here this morning, I decided there must be an end to this. Education has always been sacrificed by those who give it. And I go back to history. When in 1843 the first primary school was established, people were begged to come to school.
What would you have had ASUU do?
Well, I want ASUU as teachers for the sake of the younger generation, those who are there, the leaders of tomorrow, to consider their position, continue discussions, but come back to work. Time is not, there are Nigerians who are waiting for their children to graduate from school to come and take care of them. There are those who are there who want their children to take position in their life while they are still alive. There are girls who are in school of marriageable age who want to graduate to marry. All what is happening to society should be the uppermost in our minds. That must be the most important thing, and we should all be compassionate.
I'm wondering, Chief Sylvester Onoja, thank you very much. Well, part of what you said now relating to the appeal for ASUU to consider the harm of the prolonged strike, some persons would argue that this relates to emotionalism. And earlier, if you recall, Professor Sulekano, I had asked the question whether there is some competition amongst ASUU respective leadership to see who organizes the longest industrial action. Over the years, we've heard this same appeal when the strike gets too prolonged, 3 months, 4 months, 5 months. I think probably one of the longest was 9 months. And now we are into the seventh month of this strike. So, because of the students, because of parents, XYZ, come back. But some persons now are arguing that, look, that doesn't address the core issue. And Dr. Nini Sumonu did raise 2 issues. He talked about remuneration and funding. I want Professor Abdullahi Sule to also come in here. Sometimes when you hear some of the staccato statements concerning the issues that are in contention, particularly with regard to funding, we've heard it sometimes that, look, ASUU, you will make your demands maybe 1 trillion naira or 4 trillion or whatever the number is, and there is a presumption that government should fund it. And ASUU members have also been heard to argue that we cannot, or the country cannot continue to run on the basis of the prescriptions of the Bretton Woods institutions, namely World Bank and IMF. And persons are saying that if funding is a critical element in this, why should we not revise the funding of public education in the country? That the whole era of all of us being virtually on scholarships in the 1970s and 80s, that era is no longer sustainable 40 years down the line. Prof.
Well, thank you for raising that matter. But in the first place, let me say that scholars are not enemies of students. They are not enemies of learning. In fact, they sacrifice even with their lives. We know the number of our colleagues who are committed to this struggle who have lost their lives, which under normal circumstances they would have survived. So they cannot be enemy to the system. More importantly, when you look at the existing situation that we are in, the entire laxity to address and of course get it done and finished is on the side of those who control the state and the powers of the state. People are talking about sacrifice, compromise, submission, to the will of the society. We've done all that. In fact, at the latest stage of this crisis, why our members are angry, you wonder, why could all 100% of the branches, we haven't had that kind of thing for a very long time in our struggle. Why should everybody be angry? What we presented to government as a document of negotiation, just as Aremo was mentioning, at the beginning of negotiation, you give your document of demand and they tell you, they give you the response. We concede the government to come up with their own position. They came up with a position that far away from our submissions, and we accepted. In fact, we even go to the extent to ensure that before we give our commitment, that what happened really is real, it's correct. We asked the minister, this position that the government team is presenting to on the negotiation table, have you approved it? Is it with your knowledge? Have you sanctioned it? He said yes. We accepted. But just the moment after we thought everything has come to conclusion, then the whole thing was destabilized again. By who? By agents of government. They now turned back and said, no, keep aside that document.
What are these issues? I mean, let's bring it down. Let's to visible level. What are those issues that we agreed on?
The issue is document that we arrive at on the negotiation table as an agreement, a draft agreement that remains only its ratification. That is, government approved the chairperson of the committee to sign, and the union signs.
Which committee is this one?
What's that?
Which of the committee is this one?
The ASUU Federal Government Negotiation Committee.
Is it the one headed by Professor Nimi Briggs?
Yes. Can you remember that?
I'm asking. I'm sorry to interject.
Okay.
For purpose, because everybody here, we're all stakeholders.
Yes.
In the education system.
Yes.
What are the particulars of this agreement? It's not supposed to be a top secret document. I mean, is it one that is going to adversely affect us? Is there an ambush being prepared for other stakeholders? What are the issues that we assume? Yes. As I said, I mean, you say, what are the particulars? To the extent that you can disclose, if you are constrained to remain silent.
You see, from 1992, in fact, right from 84, our agreement has some fundamental structures. One, funding of the institutions, which has been shrinking. Two, conditions of service. Three, the autonomy of the universities and other matters. Okay, and on all these issues, it appears that we have reached conclusion. But at the tail end of virtually, we are just waiting to see that go and sign and of course close this chapter. Somebody says, no, this is not what we accept. Then a single sheet of paper was presented to the union. Single sheet of paper.
Stating what?
Stating that take this or leave it. That's a statement.
Kingsley, if I recall, we had the Minister of Labour here on Good Morning, and I think he made reference to the particulars of this committee that you talked about. And one of the issues he talked about, or he said was found out, was the fact that the representatives on the part of the government were, I want to use this word, chased away from the negotiation process. And then secondly, that the total amount, that ASUU was demanding, I think 1.6 trillion naira, was,
excuse me,
was too much for government to bear. I think those were the two issues the minister raised, arising from this committee.
Can I respond to that?
Please do.
You see, in the first place, there is nobody that was chased away from the negotiation table. If the minister were here, I would tell him that what he said is not true. And whoever told him that, he fed him with the wrong information. And that's why the government arm of the negotiation team issued a paid advertisement to dispute that. When I spoke earlier on, I talked about the violation of the principle of collective bargaining. It's the crux of this crisis. Under the circumstance in which you sat down and negotiate all the nitty-gritty of what you're supposed to address, and it reached a point in which the employer, represented by councils under the authorities of Ministry of Education, convey what has been done, and what remains is that go and sign the document, for approval, then somebody says no. That's where the matter is. And what they did wrongly against the principle of collective bargaining is that after we've reached that agreement, the document now is taken to another group who actually had representation on the committee of negotiation. Labor Ministry is there, Wages and Salaries Commission is there, the budget is there. From the Office of Minister of Finance, they have representation. In fact, even the Ministry of Justice have representation on that, But after you finish the negotiation with all their input, now you take it back again to the bureaucracy. That's why the crisis began. Somebody who doesn't even understand the university system is telling his opinion that no, government cannot do that. Look, let me tell you, we didn't ask government in this agreement to give us 1.3 trillion. It's a fallacy.
How much is the asking?
They should quantify it, but it's not in any way. Look, the 1.3 trillion is the first thing I explained to you. The whole rehabilitation of the university system in 6 years. In 6 years.
Yeah. Professor Sule,
when we passed that 6 years, only one tranche was given.
So you have 5 tranches outstanding, and perhaps by now there's also been an escalation in the cost, so that amount would have ballooned. There was one point
excuse me, let me explain that.
No, I'm sorry, Prof. Just hang on a second, because we're going to have to take a short break. It's a commercial break. I talked about funding. Can we not have alternatives for government to be able to raise this. I mean, we see the pressures all over the place. If we say security, let me give you this example. I'm not speaking on behalf of government, but just as a stakeholder, if we say we have security challenges, mobilize the intelligence and defense forces, oh, they have taken out some terrorists somewhere in Sambisa, oh, they've now moved to the northwest and have also taken out some bandits. If you fire one missile, consider the cost of that missile. If you fire one AK-47 bullet, consider the cost of that. So that negatives the other aspect. But these are issues that, as I said, we'll have to drill into. We'll take a short break now. When we return, we'll continue with the conversation.
You understand?
All right, you're welcome back. And it's still Good Morning Nigeria live on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority. We still have all our guests with us, 3 here in the studios and from Ile-Ife via Zoom. Comrade, I would like you to be brief on this. I know that this is a subject matter that we can continue to discuss. You've already talked about the cardinal principles surrounding collective bargaining, give and take, and what needs to happen. But as to use that, what is probably a cliche, the elephant in the room relates to funding. I asked Professor Sule Kano that question. Can we shift from, you say, look, you are making a demand of 1.something trillion from the government XYZ. What is it that can be done to boost government revenue? Is it possible to say, look, government, if you are scared of this, bite the bullet and say, look, if you have 1 million students in federal public universities, 100,000 naira per session, which will be about 100 billion naira, and this will solve some of these challenges that we are facing. But we hear from some quarters that ASUU is saying, no, parents can't pay XYZ, and then the conundrum continues. In the meantime, people's children are suffering, the students are suffering, and so on and so forth. Can we take a second look at the funding of federal universities because there are other challenges?
Well, I'm not sure whether this question would have been better for Minister of Education or Minister of Finance because of our funding. But let me put it this way, for appropriate or a wise outcome of any collective bargaining process to be real, each party must learn to count their gains, even as they have not achieved the total demands they are looking for. And if you play it back, because I told you before that what we're having, the crisis we have has been there for long, legacy crisis. I think I want to let us know that if there's need for proper reflections, and that reflection will reveal that even though we've not gotten there, the revitalized education sector that ASUU is looking for, there are some progress has been made. It was due to ASUU's struggle that we have TED Fund. So we can't really be thinking of what will be the way for funding. Well, we already have one that has come through the struggle of ASUU over the years. We can interrogate that further. Can we not? How effective has been TED Fund in funding the university? And I know a lot has been spent by TED Fund. If you go to most public universities now, you will see most of the structures are there, infrastructure, classrooms, laboratories, they were done by TED Fund. And at times I used to ask myself, if TED Fund is the one building this, then what of the normal, regular budgetary allocation to the university? What are they using it for? Because we must also interrogate, it's not so much of lack of fund. How are they spending the existing fund that is available? I think there's a lot of distortions, a lot of inefficiency, a lot of corruption, even managing public university. And I think ASUU should take that as a challenge. Because I used to say that at times they can use your head to break a coconut. You know the proverb better than me. You may not be part of those people eating.
Oh, yeah.
ASUU does. But even on TED Fund, I think there is even need for more coverage. There are still more companies that can be captured who can raise more funding. But I listened on the last note on the issue of which Professor Sule raised about some of the suggestions that have been on the line. Government agencies, the way public institutions, me too, I learn now, managing an institute. it's not what you get, it's what you ask that you normally get, because there are limited, you have to go through a lot of checks. Salaries and wages commission is meant to regulate incomes of all workers in public sector. ASUU may ask for what is their right legitimately. You must also relate it to relativity. How does it affect other non-academic staff? And I think we've seen it before, in which ASUU got some improvement and other non-academic staff go on strike. So those are the part of the challenges that were. But on the last note, my own advice would be that once discussion continues, there should be cessation of hostility on all the parties.
Hostility would include return.
Yes, so let return back to classes, let collective bargaining continues. And I think we should overcome what our elder statesman said, the issue of organizational ego, who calls each other first. But I think government has responsibility to call ASUU back, to return back to discussion, and ASUU also has responsibility as revolution continue, suspend the strikes. In a way that we can now address all other issues that are there. Why I say for the last note, I'm saying so now as a comment.
Last note.
I don't know. Last note. What I want to say on this final note, you see, what is worrisome to me is that, strike is a tool, the last tool. In fact, Michael Imodu said that's the only language government understood as far back as before independence. But you see, once we overuse that strike tool, in which it becomes part of the problem, no resolution of the issues, then it becomes counterproductive. Exactly. And for me, now we are discussing more of ASUU strike rather than ASUU issues, the demand they put on the table. I think it's time to suspend the strike. Let's return back to discussions. And I think government too must reciprocate. So reciprocate means that you must now find a way to restore their pay.
Let's clarify this. When the communique says the strike is now comprehensive, total, and indefinite, that indefinite is the same thing as saying that Parliament has adjourned sine die. Which means that the strike can be called off within 24 hours. It also means that the strike could last as long as 24 days or even 24 months if it is indefinite. But I think the reasons that have been articulated this morning could, of course, be informative. Chief Anoja, you have an intervention.
I'd like to ask Chief Anoja because Comrade Isaremu described what is happening now as legacy crisis. And I want to believe that what ASUU is doing is trying to put an end to that legacy crisis. But it's
like I tried. You may bring the guys that's it.
But people also know an important issue. One way to end that crisis is to find an alternative to funding. Universities are autonomous. They have government council. What is preventing them from, seeking out these alternatives?
Well, I think that on the part of ASUU and government is ego problem. Ego. You see, government has been running schools and universities. Like you said, the councils are independent. If each university has a government council, it's independent. Let me give you my own experience as a secondary school teacher. There's what we call the PTA, the Parent Teachers Association. In most of the schools today, they pay levies. We don't go to government to ask for everything that is right. And if I give you an example of the school I was privileged to have been praised by Case College Lagos, parents spend as much as 58 million naira every year to run that school. They have teachers that are employed by PTA and paid. And so in most of the secondary schools and federal government colleges, right? Old boys come to the school and pay back. In King's College recently, in the last 2-3 days, the boys came of 1991 came and repaired all the toilets in the college. Now, ASUU should be open to other means of funding and dealing with the situations that arise in the universities. Not only the government. And I was Commissioner for Education, and I take exception to the remark made by the ASUU president. I had a state university that was one of the best. That even some state universities are quacks.
ASUU didn't
the president of ASUU said
ASUU didn't
president of ASUU said I heard him.
You should read the transcript.
No, I didn't hear it.
Listen to the video again.
I didn't read. I listened to the video.
What exactly?
And also that kind of arrogance. There are 206 universities in Nigeria. 49 of them are federal government owned, and 59 are state government owned. As we speak, there are 99 private universities. We'll talk about ASUU. A lot of people are in school. Many people are in school. And the problem I have, as I'm coming from the part of the country, of these universities, 89 of them are located in the south. So who are those bearing the brunt of this strike? Those of us from the northern part of the country. We depend largely on state universities and federal universities. So, the members of ASUU are on strike. But the 89 universities down south, they are working. So, let us call off this bluff. Government should allow people who are interested in developing universities. You are here, you are from University of Lagos. I'm sure you go back. And I know the wonderful thing Tony Momo is doing in the University of Lagos.
What he did.
What he did. Yes. All right. What other graduates of the University of I'm not about university students, what they are doing in the university. They should be encouraged. Government cannot carry it on because I have told you that we have government that are not interested in education. In the last 30 years, 20% have not been spent on education in Nigeria.
Okay, Chief Anoja, we'd like to pause you here. As you said, this is an ongoing conversation, and our task is to find solutions to what is an apparently intractable issue between ASUU and the federal government. Dr. Niri Sumono, via Zoom, still with us, National Coordinator of the Congress of University Academics. Again, I want to throw the issue of funding of university education. But for how long can we continue to play the ostrich and assume, for instance, that parents are too poor to afford even some minimum tuition fee? We've heard what happened to the United States recently, where President Joe Biden, as it were, wrote off the indebtedness of students, of student loans up to a certain threshold. And some of those loans have been carried over. We don't have student loan facility here with us, but of course, elsewhere in the advanced countries that we point to, there are differences. And one issue we have not been able to touch on today is the purpose of universities and what those universities are actually doing. But very quickly, Dr. Sumono, tell us, is it a big issue for us considering the kind of expenses that we have? Private universities have arisen and they are all over the place. You heard the numbers from Chief Anoja and how much parents are paid in those private institutions. There are state universities that also charge fees. So why should that be different from federal universities where, as I gave the example, assuming you have 1 million of them and then you have 100,000 per session, couldn't that in some sense address some of the challenges that we're talking about?
Thank you very much. I will pick it up from the report I have that I've gone through. The needs assessment report, which was led by Professor Mahmoud Yakubu, had some other means of generating fund for the university in that report, and that can be seen as a starting point. The second way I'm going to look at that matter is to say that we can only look at different countries with different models, and that will amount to thinking globally, but we still need to act locally. And what acting locally will mean to us will be like going through what the Nobel laureate, Professor Wole Soyinka, said a couple of days back, reported in the newspaper. There needs to be a meeting of critical stakeholders, academics, parents, actors, government, to then decide what model will work for this country. Every country look at models that work for it. In some countries, in Europe, for example, the students don't pay tuition, but nothing is free, even in Freetown. What happens is that citizens pay for the education through tax and some other means. So we should aggregate all this in meetings of concerned stakeholders and look at the model that will work for this country so that we can break this cycle of open and close.
Thank you. Just a last word from Professor Sule Kanu. First, would ASUU be willing to explore other means of funding as even recommended in NAIDS document? And lastly, what might government do now to bring ASUU back on the discussion table?
Well, for the last question, actually, it's government that will answer that. But as to the sources of funding, in all our agreement documents, even in this latest draft, we have sources of funding. We sit down and crack our heads. In the series of agreements we entered with government to this last one, even a committee was set up specially, to see what are other sources of funding will come up for the government, But what do you see? Instead of government to articulate those sources, they are now plagiarizing them, taking them one by one to service other sectors of the society. We are the thinkers, we've never been acknowledged, and somebody is using our ideas and is fighting us. That's unjust.
Is that part of the ego issue that Chief Sylvester Naja?
I don't know. That's the fact.
We are pressed for time now. We're not hearing from our producer just yet, but it's an issue that we have to return to pretty soon, because one of the points that we touched on, we raised that we couldn't discuss, namely the purpose of universities. We hear of endowments elsewhere, we hear of the holdings, and look, some universities have so much land, and you are wondering why universities can't even feed themselves.
Go and take our agreements and study them.
Fantastic.
Never been implemented in Nigeria.
Again, some of us are speaking like outsiders. Those who are inside will know where they should be, and the proper role of governing councils of universities. Gentlemen, we'd like to thank you for being our guest this morning. Very interesting conversation, a number of points that you have raised. Comrade Aremu, Director General, Michael Ibodu, Institute for Labor Studies, Ilorin, Kwara State. Always a delight having you on Good Morning Nigeria.
Thank you.
Professor Abdullahi Sule Kanu, former president of ASUU. The fire is still burning in him. Professor Sule Kanu, thank you very much for being our guest this morning.
Thank you.
Chief Sylvester Onoja, former Commissioner for Education, Kogi State, and also former Principal, King's College, Lagos. A delight for being our guest this morning and sitting through for your contributions as well. From Ile-Ife, via Zoom, we're joined by Dr. Niyi Sumonu, National Coordinator, Congress of University Academics. Thanks a lot, gentlemen, and see you sometime soon. Okay, so that does it for us on Good Morning Nigeria today. Join us again tomorrow, Wednesday, for a fresh package of the program, 7 o'clock, same time in the morning. I'm Kingsley Osadolo.
And I'm Claire Adelabu Abdul Rezaik. As always, please do take action against rape and rapists. That way you too can be a star. From all of us here, bye-bye.